Welcome into a special edition of Three True Values as we break down the 2024 NBA Draft. I've got my friend, my co-worker, my colleague, I don't think he's technically my boss anymore. I think anyways, I call him Derek. Lewis is with us on the podcast to talk all things NBA, to help walk us through, guide us through this mock draft format that we're going to go through. We're going to talk about all 30 of the first round picks, who should be taken there, what are some of the trade talks around those picks, who makes sense to go into that. I know this will come out on Tuesday, right before the draft, so you will be able to check out plenty of my mock draft work. Should have a 2-round mock draft up, as well as a best fit mock draft if you want to read other options that I've got on the table for these teams and more heading into the big day as we get the first ever 2-day draft, which is going to be fun because we're going to have extra content going into the second round. But without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start talking about the NBA draft, because at number 1, we have the Atlanta Hawks, who look more like a playoff team than a team that should be picking number 1 overall, but they win the lottery. And now here they are. They've got a lot of big decisions to make about that franchise. A lot of them start at point guard because they made a trade with the San Antonio Spurs to acquire DeJounte Murray. The fit with Trae Young has not been great. It has not worked out how they hoped it would. So, Derek, what do you think they should do there, and how should that influence this pick?
The thing about the Hawks, right, is they, in a way, even though they're like probably the most complete team who could have won the lottery, they kind of need everything anyway. So that's kind of the weird thing about the Hawks, is like you could see them going in several different directions and they all make sense. Are they going to trade Trae Young? Are they going to trade DeJounte Murray? If they do, you could argue they could go for a guard. There's not elite level guard in this draft that you probably would do that, but you could make the argument. I believe you have them going Zaccharie Risacher. I don't know why I made him a WWE wrestler. Anyway, and that makes sense too, because if you keep Trae Young, you need copious amounts of wing defenders. Or you could have them going Alex Sarr and replacing Clint Capella, maybe getting a super type of Clint Capella who could possibly shoot threes for you. So there's like, even though they're like one of the more complete teams in the draft, they can go in so many different directions. And in a draft where there's not a established consensus number 1 pick, it makes things even more confusing.
Yeah, and it looks like they're going to overhaul the roster in some way, whether it's moving one of those guards, whether it's moving one of their centers as well, because as you mentioned, Alex Sarr is a viable candidate to be this number 1 pick. So is Donovan Clingan, a player that they seem to have liked from all the intel. But I think Risacher, he makes the most sense here at the top of the draft because, one, we got some intel last week that Alex Sarr has not even worked out for or met with the Atlanta Hawks. So generally that kind of indicates that there's some kind of breakdown there in terms of the player wanting to be there. The team has tried to set it up and it just hasn't happened. Who knows? Maybe it's travel issues, whatever the case is. Maybe they'll still end up taking him regardless of all those things. We've seen that before too. But Risacher makes a lot of sense here. You put him on the wing. That frees you up. Maybe you can move DeAndre Hunter instead of having to move one of your bigs in that package. And you start to rebuild that way and start to kind of piece together this team. You like you said, they can pretty much go whichever way they want because they can start from scratch here. They've got core pieces in place, but even the core pieces, they can shift around. They can choose one or the other on either end of that depth chart. So I think that's for the Hawks. More so than most years, we don't know what they're going to do at this point. And so we have to kind of wait and see, and that'll play into a lot of the trades that we'll talk about further down the board. But I think at number 2, the Wizards, it makes the most sense to go for whichever of Risacher or Sarr falls past number 1. So I've got them going Alex Sarr here as we go through this mock draft. I think that if you're the Wizards, they're a team that does need everything. They kind of are searching for a direction. They are looking for what to do. And so if you take Alex Sarr, you put him in there, and suddenly you've got a center that you have not had for quite some time and something to build around as you start going forward here, as you maybe look to move Kyle Kuzma, some of those other pieces around the roster.
Yeah, you could argue that the Wizards are the Hawks, except just everything is worse. Like they also need everything except they suck. So it really is like a full teardown, and they can kind of go either way. So it makes sense that you kind of have them kind of mirroring whatever the Hawks don't do. They'll do the opposite of in a sense because they need as much high end talent and high end potential talent as they can get. And so it makes sense for them to go Sard. Daniel Gafford's very mad at you for saying they haven't had someone but your point is completely valid. I just want you to know that Daniel Gafford's going to come after you.
Hey, look,
So
I like Gafford. I'm a fan of his game, but it kind of felt like that was coming to an end. Like he was not the long term fit
for
as
sure,
the franchise cornerstone there. But as we move to number 3, this is where we get really interesting because this is where the draft plays out. I think that Sar and Risacher in some order are going to come off the board 1 and 2. That means that Donovan Clingan is the last player in that kind of top tier that is left on the board for somebody to come up and grab because we know the Houston Rockets don't really need a center. They've got Alperen Şengün. They've got Steven Adams now on their roster. Jacques Landale still there as well. So they're pretty stocked up there. They've also got a lot of young talent. They don't really need another guy who's in that 23 or younger category. They could put out a full starting 5 of those guys if they wanted to already. So makes sense here for them to shop this pick, which we know they've been doing. A lot of intel floating around that they've talked to the Memphis Grizzlies, to the Chicago Bulls. There was some talk about the Brooklyn Nets, but that seemed to be more the Rockets trying to angle to get Mikal Bridges. The Nets have been very, very adamant that they will not be doing that to this point. So the Rockets here, we're going to have them select Reed Sheppard because I think at the end of the day, the Rockets, they're going to sell this. They're going to go all out, and you've already seen it in these rumors of who they want in a potential trade from the Grizzlies, from the Bulls. What do they want to bring back? Well, now Alex Caruso's already been traded. I think that would have been one of the big pieces that they would have coveted if they were making a deal with the Bulls. So maybe the Bulls are already out of that race. We'll see what happens as things continue down the road. But if you get past the 3rd pick, I think Clingan starts to fall down the board and the price goes way down on what the Grizzlies, the Bulls, anyone else who wants Clingan would have to pay. The price to get from 9 or 11 up to say 5 or 6, which we'll talk about in a minute, is much cheaper than it would be to get to number 3. So do the Rockets kind of call the bluff? Do they say, we're picking Clingan regardless. You can negotiate with us after the fact if you want to try to get him. I mean, Derek, if you were the general manager there, what route would you take with this pick? Would you just take a young guy in Sheppard who seems to fit into any mold, or would you try to get the veteran player, or maybe just hang Clingan over everyone's head and go ahead and take him anyways?
honestly, I'd probably just hang Clingan over everyone's head because I don't necessarily the Steven Adams things makes it a little more complicated, but I don't think that Clingan necessarily doesn't fit in Houston because Sengun is not necessarily a defensive. He doesn't have the defensive profile to be center long term necessarily. Now, Jokic is this, and so that's kind of the high end of what you can expect, but not, Jokic is a once in a lifetime player. So, I don't necessarily think that even if they didn't trade Klingon, it would be the worst thing ever. So if you're that close to a deal and everybody wants Klingon and you have the big stick, I think you wield the big stick as opposed to taking Reed Sheppard, who the Rockets, ironically, are kind of the opposite of the Wizards and the Hawks because they have so many things that they don't need anything, so they can kind of take anything they want to. It's kind of one of those. The top 3 are like you kind of laid out are just very very weird situations, and so since the Rockets have that flexibility, I say you swing for the fence. You try to hold Klingon over everybody's head, and you try to get the best deal that you can, knowing you have the thing that they want.
Yeah. As we move on here to the 4th pick, I've got the San Antonio Spurs going with Stephon Castle, the point guard / shooting guard out of UConn. Showed a lot of ability to play on and off the ball at UConn. Really a great defender. The shooting is the question for him. And I know you follow the Spurs very closely. Shooting is something that's been brought up as the most important thing to put around Wemby. Do you like going with a Stephon Castle here? Can you overlook it because maybe he's on the ball? Or do you think that they should be placing a little bit more emphasis on that? Maybe it means that you take a player who's a little bit lower on your board, but you get a better fit with Wemby. What do you think they should do here at the 4th pick?
Well, first off, I think the Spurs are they're in that position where you kind of have to go best player available, within reason of a positional fit. I don't think that they're in a position with so much talent on the roster where they can kind of get cute and be like, well, we need shooters, so we're gonna go, 5 slots down on our draft board. I don't think they're in that position. I also think it's a bit overstated a little bit. They definitely need shooting. Don't get me wrong, but it's a bit overstated how to what degree they need shooting because if you follow them as the year went along last year, their shooters did get better as the offense got more comfortable. Everyone knows about the Jeremy Sohan experiment. That really did throw off their shooters progression because they weren't getting the balls in places where they could shoot, and you can see those numbers uptick. Now that again, that's not to say that they don't need shooting, but I don't think it's such a need that you go 5 positions down on your board. And I like the castle fit that you have here for the San Antonio. I think as you build around Wemby, who is a generational defender, you want more defensive talent to suffocate those teams. And then that's where you kind of hang your hat as you're building around a young talent. And then as you see who doesn't develop as a shooter, then you can make adjustments around that. But if you can hang your hat on being an elite defense, you're talking about now you're a playoff team. And then once you get to the playoffs and they expose your shooting, then you can kind of figure that out as you go along. I think people put the cart before the horse and they're like, oh, you got to get in all these shooters. It's not necessarily how you build a long-term title contender necessarily. Now, there's various ways you can do it, but that's my opinion. The bedrock has to be defense. So I
No.
like what you did here with Stephen Castle.
Yeah, people forget the old saying, defense wins championships. And I think that that's a good way to build out. Like you said, they've got the pick at 8. If they go with a defensive player, maybe they go with an offensive player or a wing player at number 8. But now we've got to pick for the Detroit Pistons, who I've got taking Matas Buzelis. This one feels like the easy fit. It's the one that you don't have to think too much about because, as it turns out, Matas's agent is related to one of the executives in the Detroit Pistons' new front office structure. We know that the Pistons need wing talent to put around Cade Cunningham. We know that Matas projects as a guy who would fit that role nicely. He's got big, a lot of length, a lot of size. So, I mean, this is the one where it's like too easy. You just kind of like skip this one when you're putting together the mock draft. You're like, okay, yeah, Matas. And maybe he goes off the board at 4. Maybe he ends up slipping down. But, man, I got to think that all the signs are pointing to Matas Buzelis, to the Pistons here at 5.
I've been hurt before. James, and this definitely is going to end with Montas getting traded for Ron Holland on draft night after the Pistons take him because I don't know. I'm just getting very Mikal Bridges vibes right now. You've scared me. The Pistons will figure out a way to make the easy choice, the hard choice. I don't know. I'm worried. I'm worried now. But Buzelis is just. He is like a perfect fit for what Detroit needs. We know they have all those centers. We know they have all those guards. They need swingmen, and he's got all the potential in the world to fit nicely in there as long as he can get his shooting ability where it needs to be and his creation ability where it needs to be. He's got a lot of upside.
Yeah. And now we get to number 6 with the Charlotte Hornets. And this is one I struggle with projecting trades in mock drafts because it's such a touchy subject because you get one wrong and then suddenly your entire mock draft is kind of downhill from there. You're struggling to piece it together after that. So you can do it for fun. You can do it occasionally, maybe a special edition mock draft. But this is one where I feel very safe and confident saying that if the Rockets do not hang Donovan Clingan over teams' heads, the Hornets will. If it doesn't happen at number 5 and it doesn't happen at number 3, 6 is where Donovan Clingan will come off the board. I don't think it's going to be the Hornets who end up with him, but I think they're kind of the stopping point of, hey, all the reports have been, if he falls to 7, the Trailblazers are just taking him. They're going to say, look, this is a guy who's top 3 at least on our board. He's at 7. We need talent. We're just going to take him. So you've got to get to at least 6 if you want to come up and get him. So I think that a team like the Memphis Grizzlies, who we know has a need at center, we've heard all the reports that they're calling around. They're talking about how to get up. They love Donovan Clingan. I think this is where they probably do it. I'm not going to say for sure it's the Grizzlies. Who knows? It could be the Bulls. We've heard that name mentioned as well. Other teams, I'm sure, would be interested in coming into that conversation. So whoever it is, I think at number 6, I don't think that the Hornets end up making the pick, but I think that it will be Donovan Clingan if he falls to this point in the draft because, I mean, this guy is an elite rim protector from day one. I think he's one of the easiest translations to the NBA, a guy who can make an immediate impact on a team that's looking to win.
What do you think the cost? Because you said you kind of laid out what the cost would be to get to 3. What do you think the cost is to get to 6 if they do, excuse me, draft Donovan Clingan and hang him over everybody's head?
Yeah. So the cost at 6, I would put it, I think it's lower than most years because it's very flat draft once you get past those top 2 or 3. But Clingan, I would put in those top 2 or 3. So it's an interesting spot here because we have those teams that don't need a center picking at that point in the draft. So we get to 6, and I think it would be a good rotation player who probably is a little bit younger, has some upside. I think that's what you're kind of looking for here. Somebody who has established themselves that they're an NBA player, especially if you're the Hornets, because if you're the Hornets, you've got to fill out a roster that can start competing. You've got LaMelo, you've got Brandon Miller. You're looking for some shooters on the wing. If I'm them, I'm comfortable with Mark Williams at center right now. I think that he's got a lot of potential. Whatever you want to say about Bridges, it seems like they're kind of committed to bringing him back, and we know he can score the basketball at power forward. So you're talking about needing either a 2 or a 3 to put out there, and then you're going to need depth behind them. So if you can get those depth pieces, they traded away PJ Washington last season. Maybe that means a power forward. If you're asking me from the Grizzlies, which is a team, obviously I'm in this city, I follow them the closest. I think one of the pieces that I've seen kind of thrown around that makes the most sense to me is Santi Aldama, somebody who for the Grizzlies, he's not going to be as big of a part of your rotation next year. You get Brandon Clark back. You're bringing in a center. So Jaren Jackson's going to play more time at the 4. So you take that guy who's established himself. We know he can play as a top 10 player in the rotation in the NBA. You give him a situation where he's probably going to have more freedom to get up shots, to play a little bit more freely on offense in Charlotte. I think that would make, along with the 9th pick, a lot of sense if that's the way that they choose to go.
Really quick, say they don't want to hold Clingan over everyone's head. Who do you think they would draft? Obviously, they don't really need a center per se because they have Mark Williams, as you said. What would they go? Who do you think they would go with if they didn't decide to go the Clingan route?
Yeah, I think in that case, it probably comes down to Cody Williams or Dalton Connect. Those seem to be the 2 names on the wing that everyone has in that next tier. If I'm the Hornets, I go Connect. I think that his immediate impact, his immediate punch comes in and helps you in a bigger way than Williams, who's going to have to develop a little bit more, come into this situation and figure things out. I think Connect is pretty much a plug and play guy. You're going to get what you're getting from Connect is day one, he can come out and score 14, 15 points for you in an NBA game. And if I'm the Hornets, I'm ready to ramp this thing up. Like we've LaMelo is he's getting older. You got to start moving. Brandon Miller showed last season that he can score the basketball at a high level. So I'm looking to propel this rebuild forward. And we know in the East, it's a lot easier to get into that playoff conversation. So if I'm the Hornets, I go Connect there and kind of make that my starting 5. I'm pretty set with the guys that I've mentioned so far with that team if I want to go ahead and make this pick. Now, we move on to the Portland Trailblazers, who can go best available with one caveat. I am not taking a guard who wants the ball in his hands no matter what. I don't care if my top 4 or 5 guys left on the board are point guards. You've got too many guys right now as it is. They might have to trade off an Anthony Simons to kind of push this thing forward. And they're not one of these teams with a lot of cap space. That's the thing with the Ayton contract, with the Jeremy Grant contract. They're a team that's more so looking at avoiding the tax than they are a team looking to fill cap space. So they're in an interesting spot right now, and those are long-term deals. So it's not something that you're just like waiting one more year to get off of. So if I'm the Trailblazers, I'm looking on the wing. That's where I want to fill needs. And Cody Williams in this situation makes a lot of sense to me. A guy who we've seen his brother in the NBA. We've seen how he's developed. Obviously, they're different builds. Like it's not just a different play style with those two. Cody is much more of a lanky, long guy. I mean, we've seen Jalen, how much he has filled out in the NBA. Now, if I'm the Trailblazers, there's this little hint in the back of my mind saying, we know it's in the genes to fill out that way. And if that happens, you're talking about a whole nother level. But Cody Williams, a guy who you would have liked to see a little bit more consistency from him. That probably would have pushed him a little bit further up the board. But teams seem to be sold on his upside here with the 7th pick. And I do think that the Blazers for what it's worth, we're talking about trades. It feels like almost every pick at this point in the draft. I think they're pretty likely to hold on to this because, like I said, if Klingon falls, you take the best player available by far on your board. If Williams is there, he's a guy who fits pretty well in that scheme. So if I'm them, I'm keeping this pick just about no matter what. Now we're back on the board though to the San Antonio Spurs, and I've got them going Devin Carter. Are you okay with taking two guards in one draft, or would you want to maybe go ahead? Excuse me. I made an edit to this draft, so I have the wrong thing listed here. I have them going Dalton Connect now in this draft. Dalton Connect, he fills the need that we were talking about earlier. You add that wing shooter, somebody who can come in and provide immediate impact to your team alongside the guy that you just brought in to handle the ball, Stephon Castle. So is this just about best case scenario in your mind for what the Spurs can do with these two picks?
Yeah, I don't mind the going guard. I think it's crazy. I would have gone in my mind. I would have done more bigger wing guard. Every time I envisioned having two picks. But the more I look at these guards, I see that there's a chance to actually get some young, in this case, I actually kind of like the Devin Carter pick a little better. I don't, again, the foundation of defense, and he has some scoring upside. So I actually don't mind even getting a little more offensively challenged, quote unquote, with the guard. But Dalton Connect is as Stephen A would say, he lights it up. So you can't really go wrong with a lot of these guards in this draft, in my opinion, in terms of filling out a roster. There's no quote unquote lead guard in this draft, but there are just a ton of guards who I think will be long-term NBA players.
Yeah, Devin Carter, also interesting there, is a very good, like very good rebounder. So with Wimby, who can often be further away from the basket, that can help to have guards who are crashing the boards. As we get to the ninth pick here, this is the Grizzlies pick, and I've got them going Devin Carter because I think I mean, I've kind of established, I think they're probably trading somewhere else. I think they go up. I think they go down if they aren't able to get any kind of clinging deal done. And if they trade down, I'd look for a Khalil Ware, a Zach Edey. But as it stands, if they're stuck at 9, nobody's going to trade anything, then why not go Devin Carter? You know what you're getting there. He's a veteran guy. He can come in and immediately impact this team. He kind of sets you up to make those trades outside of the draft that you're going to have to make if you don't get a center from this draft class. So I like the fit for Devin Carter here. His dad, also an assistant coach for the Memphis Grizzlies, so they're very familiar with the family. I would assume he's going to pass all the background checks, given that information. But he, by all standards, is great defender, great athlete, real team player. But he's also just a good guy. From everything I have heard from the people who have talked about him, he grew up around the NBA. That's something that a lot of organizations really value, is these kids who, whether they're the son of a coach or a player or an assistant, these guys who have been around the NBA, they seem to have a much better grip, a better understanding of kind of the way things work, the mentality they need to have when they step into a gym on a daily basis. But as we move forward here on the 10th pick, we've got the Utah Jazz. Now, I believe from everything I've heard, they're kind of set on, they want Cody Williams or Dalton Connect. Those are the two names that they really like. But in this case, they're both off the board and we don't have them trading up. So maybe they decide to try to move up the board to secure one of those two, or maybe they sit back and they say, well, they're both gone. Now where do we go? And I think Nikola Topic is a guy who's sliding down the board a little bit here to number 10 from where we originally thought he would go. He's got an ACL tear, but ACL tears, as bad as they are, they're not what they used to be. You can kind of come back from an ACL tear. It's generally considered a pretty isolated injury at this point. Would you have concerns if you're the Jazz? We know that they tried Keontae George at point guard. It worked okay. I think they call it lead guard there because clearly Keontae is not a point guard. But are you okay? Are you comfortable if you're in that front office taking a guy who has an injury right now? Or are you somebody who's a little bit more risk averse and thinks maybe we should just take somebody who can, play basketball if we needed them tomorrow and that doesn't have some kind of history of injuries? Where do you stand in that kind of debate?
You know, obviously it'll depend on the medicals, which we were not going to be privy to. And so there's degrees of which you should be concerned. In general, I'm not concerned by that injury in terms of long-term ramifications. Obviously, if it happens a second time, that's when you begin to be concerned. But I'm more concerned if I'm the Jazz about the fit. The fit around George. Topic isn't exactly blazing fast speed. His shot's a little bit of a project. That would be more my concern with taking Topic, not necessarily the injury, more sort of the fit. But I think it obviously it'll depend upon the medicals, which is kind of a cop out answer. But at the same time, this injury isn't something that normally projects to hinder someone's career just from the off the first time.
Yeah, and
Something
if you're the
it's supposed to
Jazz,
be a lower degree of that injury to
right?
begin with.
And if you're the Jazz, you can go a number of ways here too. They're another team that's kind of like midway through a rebuild. And so you've got veteran pieces in different spots, but you could always move those if you wanted to. A John Collins, a Colin Sexton. If you find somebody that you think is better suited for the future, I think you're pretty comfortable moving on from those guys, recouping some more assets to then build the team out. And we know Danny Ainge is not shy to trade players for a bunch of assets. That's kind of been his MO since he took over
That's
as a
probably why
general
you don't have
manager.
him trading up because Danny Ainge trade up. No, trade down. I'm Danny Ainge. I want more things, not less things.
Yeah. As we get to number 11 here, we've got the Bulls. The Bulls, they traded for Josh Giddey last week. So don't think they're going to be in the market for a point guard in the draft. I think they're going to give him some time. He's still very young to run that offense, to play point guard. Now, the future and the direction of the Bulls, that's the big question. So I've got them going Ron Holland, an upside swing, a guy who can fit in on the wing, whether they bring back DeMar DeRozan or not. He kind of fills that same position and gives them something moving forward as they try to give. I mean, if you're going to play Giddey at point guard, that means you got to have people for him to get the ball too. So Ron Holland is a guy who he's fallen down the boards because of a terrible G League Ignite season, and I don't mean that from him. He still scored almost 20 points a game. Like he was good, not great. He didn't shoot the ball well at all. But man, just go watch some of his tape. It's the
Yeah.
system he's in is horrendous. It was not basketball. I went and saw one of their games, and it is barely recognizable as the sport of basketball. There's a reason that program shut down this year, and it's for the best. All these players who were going there, they're going to be better off spending a season somewhere else, whether it's a college or overseas, where they're in a real team environment and playing games of basketball, not just running up and down the floor with 5 power forwards and trying to figure it out from there. But yeah, I want to ask you on the Bulls, where do you think that franchise should go? Should they just tear it all down? Can they even tear it all down at this point? Because you got the Levine thing, you got to figure that out. He can't play with Kobe White. Vucevic is aging. What do you do? They're an old team that's not very good.
Yeah, the Bulls are like the Friday All Stars. They always got two things and don't none of them match. They got scoring bigs and scoring wings who can't shoot. It's crazy. I think it's time for the Bulls to really tear it down to the studs. And I know it feels like the Bulls since Michael Jordan have torn it down like several different times, but I think this is another time where they gotta tear it down, and that's why I actually love this Ron Holland pick for them because he has a lot of upside. You saw him make a lot of chicken salad out of chicken, and so I actually love the Ron Holland pick. I was watching tape of him today, and I was like, "Oh man, I've been sleeping on Ron Holland." So I love that, and I think it's time the Bulls to start over, man. Get rid of all these mid-tier players who are almost getting to the playoffs, but aren't going to get you to the playoffs, and start again, and let those players go elsewhere and flourish, like DeMar. Free DeMar
Yeah.
DeRozan.
Well, he is a free agent, so I guess he technically has the option to go wherever he wants right
Yeah,
now.
he's been
But
free.
we'll squeeze in here quickly before we head to a break. The Thunder pick, they're the ones who acquired Alex Caruso in that swap for Josh Giddey. I've got them going to Johnny Salon. Just take an upside swing. You just got your veteran guy to fill out the rotation you wanted. Salon is a very polarizing figure in this draft. I got to say that. A power forward who could be a floor spacer. He's an electric athlete, but the shooting is up and down. The form looks good, but you know, how many does he knock down? He takes some wild shots in France. That's another thing. He's going to have to rein that in within a team concept. But I think that he's got so much upside that if you're the Thunder and you've got all these picks, you've got all this capital, go ahead, take an upside swing, because if you compare him next to Holmgren, if he hits on the upper end of what he can be, it's going to be electric. When we come on back on the other side, we're going to take you through picks 13 through 30. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back into Three True Values. We keep rolling through here. We're on pick number 13 in this mock draft, where I have the Sacramento Kings selecting Jared McCann, a local product. He's from California, familiar with the team. He fits in really well there, I think, if they lose Malik Monk in free agency. Other teams have more to offer than what the Kings can give to Malik Monk. So it's going to really come down to the fit. Does he want to stay with the Kings? Does he think he can build something there alongside De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis? Or does he want to go try something new? And if you're the Kings, you kind of knock out two birds with one stone, I think, with McCain, because he's a very good three-point shooter. So you can play him at the 2 next to a guy like De'Aaron Fox. But when Fox is on the bench, if you want to overlap those minutes and try to stagger them, you can get McCain in at point guard, and he's going to be able to run the show some as well. So a lot that he offers the Kings that they need in that system. The Kings, the team that took a step back last season. Do you think this is somewhere that they can kind of propel themselves back into the playoff conversation? Or would you go somewhere else? Not even a player necessarily, but maybe even trade the pick. I've heard Kyle Kuzma mentioned a lot with the Kings and who they could get to improve their standing next season. Which way would you go? Would you trade the pick, or would you try to stick in here and select somebody who can help you?
Yeah, particularly because of the kind of draft this is, I just don't know that there's the value there to trade this pick to actually get something that'll actually propel them up. They're going to have to count on development. The Aaron Fox, maybe even taking yet another leap, which I know is kind of hard to fathom, but it kind of seems like that's what it'll take. I think Sabonis is what he is at this point. Keegan Murray taking a leap, possibly that's where maybe you could find some improvement. But I love this Jared McCain pick for all the reasons you stated in terms of replacing Malik Monk. As I told you, I'm pretty much talking myself into all the guards in this draft for the Spurs. So any guard you put out there, I'm probably going to be like, oh yeah, I love this guy. But Jared McCain, I've loved him the whole year because of his shooting ability, his handle, and just his professionalism. He's already kind of a professional. I just don't see the value in trying to trade this pick to do what the Kings need to do to get where they want to go.
Yeah, he's another guy. And just since you touched on it there, I do want to bring it up. He's a guy who's been kind of torn down on social media. And look, I'm never going to be the guy who kind of is like reacting to social media on every episode and trying to figure out, oh, don't say that, guys, because it's the internet and people are going to say whatever they want. They're going to troll every player in the NBA, regardless of how they're performing. But this stuff about Jared McCain and he paints his nails so he can't be an NBA player. The guy has some of the best things said about him in terms of being a professional, in terms of being a good teammate, a guy who you want on your team on and off the floor, of anyone in this draft class. So you can just put all of that to bed and accept that he is a very good basketball player who is comfortable in his own skin and can do whatever he wants in that space.
I think if Caleb Williams can paint his nail in the National Football League, I think Jared McCain will be okay in the NBA. I think it'll be fine.
Yeah, I think he'll be all right. I don't think it's going to be an issue. You've seen some of the things that these players wear in terms of like the fashion that they wear. No, that painting your nails is not an issue. As we move on, though, the Blazers are back on the clock. Like I said, they need anything except for a point guard who wants the ball in his hands. Anything else, and they'll take as many of whatever else as they can get. I've got them going Jacoby Walter. I really liked his game when I saw him live at the NCAA tournament. That was not always the case. He didn't always play like that with that same intensity. I saw that dog that you want to see on the wing. He didn't have the same motor, though. So the question is going to be, and what these teams I'm sure have figured out through interviews, through workouts, was that a flip of the switch? Did he change his mentality and become that kind of player? Because if so, I think he's got by far top 10 potential to be one of the best players in this draft class. But maybe also you got to put him in the right situation. And that becomes a struggle when you're a team like the Trailblazers kind of rebuilding. But I like the fit here. I think he's an upside swing along with Williams. I think they can play together. That you could stagger them, play one or the other. I think they fit well with what they have in Shaden Sharp, Anthony Simons, Scoot Henderson. I think this is just an all around, just a solid pick for them as they close out the lottery. Now, as we move forward, we get past the lottery, and this is where the picks start to get fun again, I think, because kind of the end of the lottery, it feels like he's going to go through. We might have a couple trades that mix it up. Who knows who's going to want to jump ahead of the other one? But we've seen some players kind of slide down the board, and we're talking about them now outside of the lottery when we didn't think we were going to. This player, I think, has actually moved up from the conversations we've had, but I see a lot of this from fans. A lot of people watch Kel'el Ware and they ask, why wouldn't we just take him with a top 10 pick? Why every tape that you'll see of Kel'el Ware, if you watch his highlights, he's a top 10 pick. There's no question about it. But there's been questions. All right. From the beginning with Kel'el Ware, there's been questions about motor, determination, all those kinds of things that you don't want to see from a rookie coming into the league. Now, he squashed a lot of it at Indiana, and that's why he's moved back up the board. It seems like these interviews have gone well. There's been enough of the character references to say, look, sure, his motor might be a little bit up and down, but he's improved and he can continue to improve. If that's the case, like I said, top 10 player in this class. I think the skill set that he brings as a 7-footer who can shoot, freak athlete who can get up and down the floor, there's nothing on the floor that you don't like about his game, really, other than the fact that sometimes you wonder where he is on the floor. So I think if you're the Miami Heat and you can get that guy, because he can space the floor, I think he works really well with Bam Adebayo. And if you can have two guys that big, that long, you start to get scary on defense, especially you talk about Jimmy Butler being on the perimeter playing defense. We know Heat culture, they're going to play hard. Maybe that's the perfect landing spot for Kel'el Ware because he's going to be held accountable. Jimmy Butler's been on teams that don't practice hard, that don't play particularly hard sometimes. And he rubbed some people the wrong way. He made sure that it was clear that was not going to happen. This is now his team. So I think it probably goes over a little bit better. He's going to be backed up. And if Kel'el Ware is on that team, I don't think you have to worry about his motor anymore. In terms of being a Heat culture type of player. This next one, though, this is the one I want to talk about. I've got the 76ers going with Rob Dillingham. I think that there's two possibilities. He is sliding down the board. He's thin, he's small, doesn't have a big wingspan, all the things that you hear that knock a guard down the draft board. I don't know if he falls this far. Potentially some team could look at him and just say, look at how good he is at basketball. We're going to take him. He can shoot threes. He can clearly dribble. He can get past defenders. He's an athlete. Why wouldn't we take him higher than this? But we've seen some Kentucky guards kind of fall into this range in the past. I think about Devin Booker, Emmanuel Quickley, Tyrese Maxey. All were drafted kind of in this range. And it all worked out pretty well. The 76ers have one of those on the team already in Tyrese Maxey. If you're the 76ers and Rob Dillingham is on the board, we know that they're big fish hunters. Like they're going out, they're looking for a star. Would you trade this pick because you know a team wants Rob Dillingham? Or would you take him and bet on getting another one of these Kentucky guards who overachieves?
I would trade the pick, and as you know, with our discussions offline, this is the only guard in the draft I have not talked myself into yet, and that's just because there is a 90% chance that Rob Dillingham will be Lou Williams, and there is a 100% chance that if I were to put Lou Williams into any draft, I would be like, you would see teams not take him, and then afterwards they'd be like, well, I could have had Lou Williams, because at the time, no one wants Lou Williams when Lou Williams is available. You only want Lou Williams when you're like, I now need Lou Williams. And so Rob Dillingham is that kind of microwave scorer, just elite ability. You know what he's going to be at the next level. The defense is shaky. The frame is shaky. I don't think the 76ers have a team that can afford to have another guard like that. Not necessarily that you can have too much scoring guards. I just think there's bigger problems for them to fill. So why not fix some of those problems and try to get something out of it? Not take Dillingham in terms of, like, you already have Maxey. I'm not sure you want two of those in terms of first round picks and stuff, such of that nature. So I would trade it after that, that very long winded explanation.
Yeah, I agree with you on that Lou Will, that kind of comp where it's like he's not offering you anything on defense, so you're never going to be able to start it. I don't think that Rob Dillingham is a starter unless something drastically changes in how he plays basketball. He's the worst defensive player in this draft. He might also be the best offensive player in this draft.
Right.
That's what we're talking about with Rob Dillingham. So if I'm the 76ers, I'm taking him because I think this is the best case scenario for them. And I don't say I'm taking him to disagree with your point. I'm taking him because getting a star is probably not going to happen on draft night with the 16th pick. I'm taking him, and then I'm looking around and telling everyone, hey, we got a top 10 player here. You're going to now trade us top 10 value. And now you can start packaging that to go get a star.
That's fair.
If you start looking at teams and saying, we're going to treat him now like a top 10 pick because we have it. We get to treat him however we want. If you value him, if you valued him as a top 10 pick, but you couldn't get up, you couldn't make a trade, now you're going to give us top 10 value. And that's where I think they can profit. If he's able to fall this far, I think you have to take him and then move him after that point and try to get whatever star you're going to go out and try to entice to play alongside Joel Embiid.
James, you talked me into it. I'm with you. I'm on board now. You did it.
All right, let's go to another team that needs to look at adding a third star or potentially just kind of getting a little bit younger. And we've got the Los Angeles Lakers. Zach Edey is the pick here. I think Edey is another one in the similar realm as what we're talking about with Dillingham. Take him because teams covet him. And then once you have him, if you think he can play with Anthony Davis, because we know Anthony Davis likes to play the 4. He has to play the 5 a lot. He's their best when he's playing the 5. But if you can give him minutes at the 4 through the regular season to keep him happy on the way to the playoffs where he knows he's going to have to play the 5, because I don't think Edey's going to come in and just be some playoff guy. I think he's more of a rotation guy. That's what he's going to be in the NBA. But he gives them something that they don't particularly have. And so I think I'd be comfortable, take Zach Edey, and then if we can flip him into something, then we'll flip him into something. If we can't, then yeah, we've got a backup center and a guy who can kind of allow Anthony Davis the opportunity to play where he seems to like playing the best on the floor.
Yeah, and Zach Edey actually fits really well next to Anthony Davis in terms of the things that Zach Edey doesn't do well. Anthony Davis covers that up, and kind of vice versa to a certain degree. Not that Anthony Davis has anything glaring weakness in his game, but so Zach Edey is a very specific player who needs to be in a very specific position. And the Lakers are one of the kind of the few teams where I'm like, all right, this is actually a nice fit for Zach Edey to actually maximize what he is as a rotational big, as you said.
Yeah. As we move on to pick number 18, we've got the Orlando Magic. We know that they've got some money that they want to spend on the wing in free agency. I think they'll probably do that. So here, what I want to do if I'm them, if I'm picking at number 18 and there's somebody available, I want a guard who can shoot. Got a lot of guards, don't have many guards who can shoot. And so if I can add Carlton Bub Carrington, I think that's a big win. I think he's a guy who had some inefficient numbers at Pitt. But if you look at what he was being asked to do, he was being asked to do a lot. He is a guy, though, he's a big bodyguard, good length. He works hard. You can see he's playing hard when he is out there. He's also kind of a raw talent type of guy where he wasn't supposed to be a one and done player. He was not supposed to have this kind of meteoric rise. So maybe there's some more untapped potential there. Shot form is good. I believe in it enough to think that as long as he's getting open shots, I think it'll work. If you start talking about off the dribble stuff and he's having to create a lot, but I don't think he will have to necessarily in Orlando because Paolo's going to have a lot of gravity. People are going to be drawn to him. When he catches that ball on the block, now Bub's able to catch and shoot more than try to dribble into something and create. So I think there's a lot of upside here with this pick. They've got too many guards, but you can flip guards. You've got guys who a little bit further into their career who maybe you could trade somewhere else, get back some assets. What you want to do now is you want to build around Paolo Banchero because we saw him kind of take that star leap last season. So I think shooting at the guard position is the first place I would go because you got defense. You got Jalen
Yeah.
Suggs. That guy is an elite defender. So I think, especially with the free agency money, we know they're going to spend on the wing. I, I'll ask you on the Magic, and I know this isn't draft related, but it fits into what they're trying to build. Do you have any interest in Klay Thompson? Because I don't.
I have a lot of interest in Klay Thompson if Klay Thompson is willing to understand where Klay Thompson is in his career and just be that. Like you said, it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier with the Spurs, except for the Magic are already there. Now that you've gotten the defense settled in and you've gotten your star orbital player who you're building around, now bring in the shooting. See if you can get some people who will fit into a role, some 3-and-D type players. Klay Thompson fits into that mold. Like you said, Carrington fits into that mold. Now it's time to shore up the shooting and be able to, because they got played off the floor a little bit in the playoffs because they just didn't have enough scoring available to them outside of Paolo. And so now it's time to shore that up and see if you can build a roster that can go even further.
Yeah, Klay is one that I don't hate it as much some days as I do others. I think he doesn't fit with the timeline. And so if you tell me that Klay can come in and be a veteran role player, mentor for this team, sure. But I don't think that's really what Klay Thompson would want. If he's going to do that, why wouldn't he do it for the Warriors?
That therein lies the rub. Does Klay Thompson understand what frame of career he is in? Because he doesn't seem to. And if he is going to get it, like you said, it'll probably be with the team who has given him all the money throughout his career. So, that's the problem with that is what Klay Thompson am I getting?
Yeah. As we move on to 19 here, we've got the Toronto Raptors. There's a couple things that I think they could do here. They could start to look at just filling out the type of Raptors team that we've come to know, or they can try to build something new. I think they're going to build something similar to what we have seen before. That's why I've got them going Kyle Filipowski here. They could also go Keyshawn George. That one would make a lot of sense as well. Because as much as the Raptors have kind of been known, like the Masai Ujiri era has been big wings. You got these big bodies that are out there playing small forward, power forward, whatever. They don't have them anymore. OG is gone. You got Pascal is gone. Scotty Barnes is the one. And so you got to build around Scotty. I think that Filipowski makes a lot of sense we know that they covet that mold because they brought in Kelly Olynyk, who had 1 year left on his deal in a trade that kind of baffled people at the time. So I think if you can bring in Filipowski, maybe you trade Olynyk at the deadline, recoup some assets from that, and then you're talking about having the same kind of profile of player there, a guy who can stretch the floor a little bit. He's 7 foot tall, so he's a real defense. I don't think he gets enough credit on defense. I mean, this is a guy who he creates blocks, he creates steals. I know that he's not some big athlete who's chasing down blocks, but in the NBA, we've seen some of the guys who are at the top of the DPOY standings are guys who are big and stand in the way of the rim. And he can do that very well and also poke out a ball or two on the drive as well.
Filipowski is going to be the Jaime Jaquez of this draft. People are going to look back in March and be like, I don't understand how he fell that far. I guarantee it. He's going to be the Jaime Jaquez of this draft.
Yeah, we'll talk about a guy here who plays a similar position to Jaime. At number 20, I've got the Cavaliers going with Johnny Furphy. A real upside swing here. I think he fits exactly what they need, but they've got kind of temporary pieces in place. They've got Max Strus now. They've got they had Niang, Okoro, but Johnny Furphy, if it pans out, and I know that he's one of the youngest players in the draft. He's another guy like Carrington who he was not a one and done prospect at all. But then they saw how he filled the roles at Kansas that he was asked to fill. And it was like, okay, that guy, if he can do it for Kansas, he can do it here. He holds up defensively and he can knock down threes in the corner. I think he's a little bit better of a shooter than what his numbers said at Kansas. A combination of being young and being thrust into a situation that he had never really been in before, playing in Australia to come into one of the biggest programs in the country in college basketball. So I think he'll grow into things there as well. But if you're a Cavaliers fan and you're watching this and you're thinking, oh no, I get it. Because this is the pick that they've made over and over again. They keep trying to find that solution as that small forward who can space the floor and allow the two bigs and the two guards to do their thing. The Cavaliers, it seemed like, were going to kind of break things up. Now, recently, it's felt like they're talking about not doing that. Derek, what do you do they need to break this down? Or is that too extreme to be talking about a team that was a 4 seed and, made it to the second round of the playoffs this year?
The Cavaliers are like the successful version of the Chicago Bulls. They actually make it into the playoffs, but it's weird because I don't want to get into this situation where we're always like, well, if they can't win the title, then they shouldn't be a team together. But the team just to me doesn't make sense on paper together. And so when you start talking about teams like that, that's when I think it's time to at least have a structured rebuild. Like maybe we're not tearing it down to the studs like I was suggesting with the Chicago Bulls, but there is a light teardown. I'm not sure that Donovan Mitchell is a long-term solution there. I'm not sure that they should hand him the keys to the kingdom. So I would say that they need at least a light rebuild, maybe revamp around Evan Mobley, who I still think is not reached the zenith of his potential per se. Now that's a dangerous proposition because he could also be capped. You never know in those kind of situations, so it depends on development. But I do think there needs to be a little bit of a light reset with the Cleveland Cavaliers, and it makes sense since they decided that their coach needed to be fired, even though he made it to the second round of the playoffs. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the Bulls. I think about the Hawks when I think about it. 2 guards, 2 bigs, and no real direction on how you're going to unlock all 4 of them to do what they all want to do. And so the Hawks kind of have an opportunity to right that. They've got their chance here. They got the number 1 pick. They can put something around it that is considered a valuable asset. If you're the Cavaliers, you don't have that as much. But for the Cavaliers, I do think there is something to be said for making the playoffs and just continuing to make the playoffs. Like that is valuable. If you're a fan of that team, and I'm not talking about like, you tweet about, oh, they're never going to win a title. I'm talking about like you watch every game every night. You prefer, if you watch more wins than losses and then get to watch a few more games, you get to go in, wave your rally towel, enjoy a playoff atmosphere, experience that with your friends, with your family. People love that. And it's good for business to continue to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
Now, that's all well and good. But when that is an acceptable method is when everyone's happy. When the fans are happy, when ownership is happy, when the players are happy. Now, I think that the fan base should be pretty happy with where they are. I haven't gotten any sense that the Cavaliers just want this team to break up, or the fans at least. But the players, there has been no indication that the players are happy. I mean, we had a full-on book written 30 minutes after they were eliminated from the playoffs. I mean, we had like 4 reporters working together to piece together everything that these players had to say about each other anonymously. So you got to figure that out.
And they fired their coach. Like that's the thing. You don't fire a coach for a second. That was overachieving this year. And they fired the coach anyway. So that just shows you the amount of unrest that is in that organization right now. From a player standpoint, they just do not seem like a happy team.
No. As we move on, we've got the New Orleans Pelicans, another team that's kind of like they're there. Some of the pieces don't fit. I think they'll move Brandon Ingram if they're able to. It's going to be interesting because he's on a big contract. So you got to find somewhere to actually offload him to, more so than just like, oh, hey, yeah, you want him? Sure, take him. But I think for the for the Pelicans now, they have 2 needs. They have a center need that they've clearly been trying to address. There's been all kinds of trade rumors about them, free agent rumors about them. If Kel'el Ware was still here, I think I'd take him. But he's off the board. And the next center that I have on my board is Yves Missi. I don't quite think he's a good fit. He's not a guy who's ready to impact in the NBA. And this is a Pelicans team that needs to start trending towards closer to a 4 seed than the play-in. They need to start making that progress. So I would go instead and fill the other need that they have at point guard. Isaiah Collier is still on the board here. And Isaiah Collier, I've got him as a lottery grade. I think he's a former number 1 recruit. He had some injuries at USC, but the back half, those last few games, if you watch it, I'm a believer in it. I think that it looked a lot better. People forget also, he's got size. Like he's 6'5". He's not some small point guard. He's got the size that you want. You pair him next to CJ McCollum. I think that kind of takes some pressure off of CJ that he's had put on him in New Orleans. If he's able to play shooting guard, I think it works a lot better. And then you've got those perimeter wing defenders that they've got all up and down their rotation as well. So I think it's a good landing spot if you're Collier, and a good compromise if you're the Pelicans. And then you go address your center need in free agency through a trade, whatever else you have to do. Moving on, we have got the Phoenix Suns. And this is the pick. This is the one. Go ahead and say it. There's been this weird kind of feeling, not as much around the Suns, but every time that I either talk to somebody or I kind of like, I'm a big fan of, all these different reporters get a little piece. Somebody leaks some kind of information to them. And I try to put it together and figure out who said what. What came out because this team wanted it to come out versus what came out because this team wanted it to come out. There's all these contradictory things going on. It sounds to me like most franchises are operating under the belief that Bronny James will come off the board before, or I'll say by pick 31. I think that's kind of the floor. I don't think he's worth that pick, but that seems to be where he's going to go. Now we know that he's only worked out for two teams, the Suns and the Lakers. All right. So it's not hard to figure out that he's probably going to land on one of those two teams. And the Suns have also had conversations about moving back to acquire multiple picks in this draft. So you start looking at teams that have multiple picks that could want to come up. That might be where you end up finding a home for Bronny James. I don't think that they will take him at this spot in the draft. But I think if they're able to trade back and get multiple selections in this class, I think then they would select Bronny James, because I don't see the Lakers. We heard Rich Paul. If he wanted leverage, he would have the Lakers take Bronny at 17. Well, that's an indication that the Lakers aren't taking, there's no discussion there to take Bronny at 17. I mean, he's throwing it out as this hypothetical. So the Suns are the team that I think will draft Bronny James. And I think it'll be by pick 31 after they trade down from this spot here to get multiple draft assets.
So with that said, what team do you see trading up to this pick, and who would they take? Who at this point in the draft do you think is worth coming up to get? Because from my view of your draft of your mock here, it seems like all the players that I would think, okay, this is time to come get a guy like that, go before the Suns pick. So now I'm curious who you would think would be worth trading up to get at this point in the draft.
Yeah, there's a couple, and I think it starts with DeRon Holmes. That's where it begins with me. I think DeRon Holmes, he's still on the board for a reason. We'll get to that in just a second. But I think if you're the team that wants him, come up, make sure that nobody decides, you know what, screw this, we're just going to take him. Like, he's the best player here. I think other than that, we're coming up on a run of wings. And sure, you can say these are into the first round wings. Why would there's 3 or 4 of them. Why would you trade up? But all these teams have a draft board. They all have a guy that they love. If you love one of these wings, if you're the Timberwolves, great example, they want to fill out their rotation here. If you think one of these wings is like he fits into the rotation, he will be top 9 next year in the playoffs, then you spend this pick in a late second rounder or whatever it is. You come up, you grab him, make sure that nobody else can get to him. If you're, a different one, the Nuggets, you want DeRon Holmes. Make sure that the Wizards aren't going to take him. Make sure that the Knicks don't decide he's their backup center if they lose Hartenstein. So I think that there's a few people. This is the area of the draft where there's no way to predict the movement, but we know it's going to come. Somebody's going to want some player, and so they're going to go ahead and move up a couple spots. I don't think they're going to get 2 good picks. I think they'll move back and then get like an into the second round pick for that pick. It won't be super valuable, but they'll get what they want, I think, out of it if they go that route. Moving forward, though, we've got the Bucks, and I've got them taking Baylor Shireman. He's the player of these wings that we're going to run through, who I think he probably fits that mold of like he's going to come in and he's going to win. Like that dude, he can shoot. He holds up in a team concept, and big fan of Baylor Shireman, have been since early on in this process. He's a real competitor. Then we move on, and we got the Knicks with 2 picks, and I've got Tristan da Silva next. I think Tristan da Silva, I think I have him actually a little bit higher than Shireman on my board, but while he's older, I don't think he's as much of a sure thing as Shireman, and that's why I think that the Bucks, as a team that needs to get back to where they were, needs to get back to the NBA Finals, probably go Shireman over da Silva. But I like da Silva's game. He's a little bit thinner than Shireman. The other question that I have, and I have it for him, Cody Williams, and KJ Simpson, who's a second round prospect. Why was Colorado what they were all season if they're all 3 so good? Like maybe it was just coaching, maybe it was the rest of the rotation. But if you've got 3 NBA players on your roster, why were you a bubble team that like barely got it done at the end, and one of them was coming off the bench? Just doesn't really make sense to me how that all went down. The second Knicks pick, this is another big candidate to be traded. I think if you're the Knicks, do you really need 2 wings? So maybe another team decides they want a wing and they come up. I think Jalen Tyson is the next guy. Keyshawn George is another name that I would put into this conversation. Could be the guy that somebody wants to come up, make sure that they get on that first round contract. And then as we kind of come down the wire here, we got the Wizards taking Yves Missi. I've got them taking Alex Sarr earlier in this draft. But I think Yves Missi, while he's also a development project, the projection for Sarr of what could make him valuable is his ability to kind of space out on offense, to provide you some kind of movement out there on the perimeter. Missy's he's gonna be in the paint. So I think the idea would be that you can play the 2 of them together. If not, you've got your depth chart set at center there if you are the Washington Wizards. Timberwolves, a team that I mentioned for wings, but that run of wings is kind of over at this point. I don't think Keyshawn George makes a lot of sense for them, mainly because he's a development project more than anything. And they're looking to win now. Like that team is ready to win. Their tax situation suggests that they can't keep this thing together forever. So go out, try to get it done right now. That's why I like Tyler Kolek to be a backup point guard behind Mike Conley. Maybe he even like learns from Conley, whatever. Maybe you give him the keys as a starter later on, or he can be your long-term backup when you go replace Mike Conley with someone else at point guard. And then we go on to the Nuggets, and this is where Deron Holmes lands. There's been all kinds of rumors, and I'm not saying I have some kind of report of breaking news. I'm just going to say this. If you read anyone's mock draft who has any kind of connections, Deron Holmes is projected to the Nuggets at number 28 here. It's usually when things are so in line with that, and there's a report out there that Deron Holmes has a guarantee, and everyone has him mocked to the same place, something might have gotten out. that's all I need to say in terms of that. But do you like this fit as they swung and missed on Zeke Naji? Do you like this fit as a guy who he plays defense and he plays on the perimeter on offense? Is this the perfect Jokic backup?
Yeah, I like the synergy there. I think pretty much we're in the stage of Jokic's career where anybody's a fit. It's almost like you can kind of do almost whatever because he'll make it work just because of his offensive gifts. But then there is the defensive side of it as well, and you'd be able to start mixing and matching and things of that nature. It gives you a lot of versatility. If Holmes can hit his high point of what we think his draft stock is, it gives them a lot of versatility with their lineups.
Yeah, and I've got him much higher on my board than this. I just feels like he's got a guarantee, maybe shut things down. Maybe he's comfortable going to play for the Denver Nuggets if that's what ends up happening.
I certainly would be comfortable going to play.
Yeah, and he does also feel like the opposite of Naji. Naji was kind of like an upside. He has the potential to be all these things. Deron Holmes has done it in college for multiple years now, being all of these things. So I like that pick as well. The Jazz, they're back up on the clock. I've got them taking Terrence Shannon here. I think he's either going to come off of the board right at the end of the first round or very beginning of the second. He, of course, was off of a lot of boards for a while, but he has had a case recently in where he was found innocent in a rape charge where the jury met and they've said they do not believe he committed this crime. So now with no legal troubles around him, we can finally start to evaluate him as a basketball player. And he's a very good basketball player, a downhill attacking guy, big body, makes some wild decisions sometimes. But, obviously he's going to be kind of within a rotation in the NBA. So you would hope that would be kind of tamed down a little bit. You can get that aggression, but maybe not the wild nature of that aggression.
I think Will Hardy's the perfect coach for that as well.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Will Hardy and what they were able to do there with Utah. So I like this idea that they're going to go out, and we've got them taking Topic earlier. I know you kind of questioned that fit a little bit, but I think coming out of this with a point guard and a wing, just about as good as you could hope for if you are the Jazz in this first round. The Celtics have the last pick in the first round. I've got them going Paycom Dadier. Now, he is a young prospect out of France. Don't look up his stats if you want to be excited because they're not good. But he's playing professional basketball at a young age in overseas. That happens with a lot of these European prospects. Like you get so excited about them, you watch their film, you hear about how great they are, and you go look up at their stats, and it's like 4 points and 2 rebounds in 12 minutes, and you're like, what? Well, they're playing with like grown men who like this is what they do. They, guys who have like been in the NBA before, and they're trying to play against them at 18 years old. So I would not let the stats alarm you. I think the thing with him is he projects as a really good shooter, but the stats won't tell you that because it's very low volume. So if you're not kind of in the gym, it's hard to get a real gauge of how good he is as a shooter. I know energy is something that teams are hoping will pick up for him. Again, he's really young, but he's got all the physical tools. And I think that the most valuable thing if you're the Celtics is he allows you to run it back because you can stash him. And this is something that we haven't seen as often with first round picks recently, but the ability to take a player who like might be really good in a couple of years and stash him, let him keep developing overseas. And then maybe when you lose a couple guys because you're just up against the tax or because somebody retires here or there, bring him over and see if he can contribute to the team. So if you're the Celtics, I like the idea of not putting money onto your books, but still getting a potential future asset, almost like trading for a future first round pick instead of making this selection. So that's how we'll round out this mock draft. Just because I think it's important, because this is a 2-day mock draft, the pick number 31, I expect to be traded because there's going to be teams who have, almost 24 hours to sit there and think about how much they like the players that are left on the board and how much they want them on their team. So you've got Justin Edwards, Harrison Ingram, Tyler Smith, a guy who could go in the first round very easily, Oso Iguodaro, who's slipped on boards, but I think he's still a very good center prospect. Dylan Jones, Keyshawn George made it this far. If you told me that I have to bet on one player being the guy who's picked number 31, I'd say Keyshawn George in this situation. If he falls into the second round, I think he's the one who teams are going to say like, why has he not been selected? A young wing with that much promise. So those are the guys to look for that number 31 pick. If you're a team that's interested in moving up the board. Thank you, Derek, for helping me through this. It was going to be, we talked about it before and I was struggling. I was like, how am I going to get through 30 picks by myself on a podcast? This is going to be just ramble and ramble. You help keep me on track, help keep me focused. We got through it in a reasonable amount of time. So hopefully everyone enjoys this. Thank you again to Derek Lewis of On3 for joining me today. This has been 3 True Values. We'll see you down the line.